Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's Writers Chat. This is where we like to gather together and talk about all things writing for writers and by writers. And we're really glad to have you guys with us today. For those of you that are live, we apologize for being a few minutes late. Many of us had tech problems due to that massive storm that went through the United States last night, and still for some people still going on. So we're really glad we're with us, and we are excited to have a special guest with us. So first of all, my name is Jean Wise. I'm the co-host, and I thank Melissa and Brandy for staying on and helping with the discussion today. And we are excited to have one of our good friends back with us, Annette Whipple, and she is the expert on kids' books, and especially nonfiction. And I love her owl stuff. She's been doing the story about the owl lately. She's a great one to follow for author ideas on Instagram and social media. And she has a great web page if you want to see a good author's web page, and it's AnnetteWhipple.com and stuff. So you get a lot of good ideas by checking that. But I love her bio. Now I'm going to read her bio so you guys can hear it, because we keep saying always the writer's bios, because you get hints on how to do it. And it says Annette Whipple celebrates curiosity, inspires a sense of wonder while exciting young readers about science and history. Isn't that a great sentence? It just really, it gets me excited as an adult, gets me curious on that. She's the author of 10 fact-filled children's books, including the Laura Ingalls Wilder Companion and the story of the Wright brothers and the truth about, and that's a series she does for Rycraft Books. And that's where the owl book is. Isn't that where the owl book is? Yeah. That owl book's it's been fun to watch your social media on the owl book, but I think you have dogs and spiders and stuff like that too. It's just the creepy crawly guys. I can't imagine writing about the creepy crawlies. I don't know. Anyway, she's got some good resources and a wonderful web page. So Annette, we're so glad you're back with us. And we're excited to talk about something we've hinted at before in the past on Writers Chat, but we've not really kind of delved into a little bit more, and that's mentor texts. So Annette, I'm gonna turn it over to you, and maybe you explain a little bit what that is and why should we know about this.
That's right. I'm so glad to be here today, and we're writers, but you know what? Writers are readers, and the best writers are those who are really thinking about what they're reading. And that's what mentor texts are. Mentor texts are basically models of published work to study, and not just read, but to actually study. And we're going to kind of go through that. And even though I write for kids, today I'm going to share some examples of some ways that those of you who write for adults or kids can use mentor texts. So I would suggest, so when we're studying a piece of writing, whether it's in a magazine or whether it's a book, I would suggest that you study a traditionally published piece of writing. And I say that because it's going to have the editorial process is going to be much more thorough. However, we really can learn from just about anything that we're reading, and we can learn the good, we can learn the bad, but really the mentor text really provides us with that. We might be looking at structure, we might look at voice, we can look at so many different things. If you've ever talked to a magazine editor, or if you've been in a writing workshop with one of them, they will say, study the magazine. And that's because that magazine that you want to submit to is a mentor text. The entire thing is a mentor text. But if you want to write, let's say you want to submit an activity or a recipe to that magazine, and you submit it just like you would maybe for your maybe you would write it like you would for your blog, or like if it was a recipe, like how you'd write it on the recipe card. Well, that might not work for that magazine. They want it to be in the same structure, the same style, even some of the same wording for certain things that magazine already does. So, if you include steps 1, 2, and 3, but the magazine doesn't do that, they're really not going to, unless it's some special, very unique recipe, they're not going to be interested in that. So, you want to model your writing after where you want to submit to, or from something else. And something to think about, and it might take some of us to go back pretty far in school, but teachers use mentor texts. They they might model writing for their students. They might do it themselves, but they can also use a published work, whether it's a poem, whether it's a book, to really get kids and their students to understand some concept in writing. So teachers do it, but writers do it too. And I actually did it before I even knew what a mentor text was. And maybe you have too. Maybe, and you can mention in the chat if you have, because I know, Jean, you said that before you knew what a mentor text was, you were doing it. And it's, if you think about, let's say you want to write a romance, but you haven't done it before, but you've read a lot, you might already know that in a romance novel, certain elements are expected. There might need to be a likable heroine, that who is that going to be? And the hero, well, they might be a little quirky, they might be a little mysterious, but they're likely to be good looking with a bit of a flaw. Not a major flaw, but there's going to be a bit of a flaw. And there's going to be some tension there, some emotional conflict. And that's what the characters are going to work through to get to that happily ever after. So that, that's just a quick way that we can think of how one genre has some certain elements that are always going to be there. And, depending on what you're writing, maybe some of those are optional. And, I mentioned the romance novel, but it's not just to study a genre. Maybe you want to study, maybe a lot of your critique partners say, oh, you really need to show this, don't tell. Well, you can study a book, whether it's nonfiction or fiction, on how to show instead of tell. You can study for the dialogue. You can study for humor, for how to show the history, how to show the healing that happens within a story. So
I
that's
love the idea of finding like a technique. And actually that's one thing that took me to the mentor text. And because we're lifelong learners, and I like almost each year, I like to kind of come up with something that I want to grow my writing in, and then I search for that in the books. And I love, I brought my mentor text out, and I love Barbara Brown Taylor, and she uses metaphor beautifully, beautifully. So I actually been studying the last couple of years that incorporating metaphor, but she's my mentor because she does it so seamlessly. You're into that metaphor before you even realize it. And I think I want that. I want that seamless picture to
yes.
the reader into it. That way they don't even identify it. And she's a master at metaphor.
And you identify that so that you can do it. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So the technique stuff is great.
Yes. I'm going to share my screen now. Hopefully it cooperates with me. And okay. Can you see my slideshow here?
Yes.
Okay. So before I knew what a mentor text was, I had taken some writing classes. And at that point, I was really just writing magazine articles. But I was reading the Chronicles of Narnia with my kids, and we were also reading and enjoying a book called Roar, A Christian Family Guide to the Chronicles of Narnia by Heather and David Kopp. My kids just loved it. They loved like exploring Narnia further through this companion guide. And I thought, oh, I'd like to write a book like that, but what would I write about? And that's when I realized, oh, the little house books. They not only do they have a built-in audience, so I knew that a publisher would be interested in it, but there was so much to learn and explore in the little publishing industry, because as I said, I had only been writing articles at that point. I wanted to understand more about children's writing. I wanted to understand the publishing industry. So I wrote my sample chapters, and I wrote a proposal, and I actually within a couple of years I did get an offer from a publisher. but we had to wait. There was waiting involved in that until I got the offer. And then there was more waiting while we waited for rights and permissions. But while I was waiting, instead of, at that point, I wasn't writing more of the book because I wasn't sure if it's going to go to contract, just because of the rights and permissions being kind of iffy with the world of Little House. But while I was waiting, I read lots more nonfiction children's literature. I was studying, I was trying to understand it even more, and that helped me to write a better book. This is the book, The Laura Ingalls Wilder Companion, a chapter by chapter guide. It came out last year with the Chicago Review Press. And I'm just going to kind of show you a little bit about how it changed because I was reading more books. Like, I had a solid idea to start with, a solid idea enough that it got an offer, but I believe it's a much better book because of what I was doing. So here's a page spread. I'm going to move us a little bit over. Here's a page spread. And where you see the little light bulbs, that's where the mentor text really came in. So I plan to have a chapter for each book in the Laura Ingalls Wilder Companion devoted to one of the 9 books of the Little House series by Laura Ingalls Wilder. I want to begin each chapter with an introduction, and I did that here. But as I was looking at mentor text, and really I was really looking, I didn't have one more mentor text. It was really just studying nonfiction books in general for the middle grade audience. But I realized I wanted to add more information and kind of let, in addition to the introduction, let each of the books have kind of like, I wanted to discuss kind of a theme. So for chapter 5, By the Shores of Silver Lake, I kind of expanded about what the Homestead Act was, because it's mentioned in the book and it's really important to the book. And this is the history that I knew I needed to include. And then it was also, there were some things that happened between books that were not included. Some, like they just kind of skipped over it because the Little House books are historical fiction. Laura Ingalls Wilder skipped over some things that she didn't want to include. And so I had included that here. And I realized I also wanted to include a lot more visuals. And here is a modern day photo of the home, the hotel where the Ingalls family lived in Iowa. And that was not in the books. But I knew I wanted to include more images. And I also realized, these are, the Little House books are fiction based on real life. So I decided to include lots of fact or fiction sidebars, and that was really throughout all of the book, because did that really happen came to my mind a lot. And even when I was reading the Little House books as a child, it was coming to my mind. And this is a chapter by chapter guide, so you can kind of see this is a page spread. So you can see chapter 3. There's a little comment on page 79, and then on the next page you can see a lot more. But just including a lot of sidebars. And actually, I went a little overboard with sidebars because my editor told me they definitely bring visual interest, but I had so many sidebars. Some of them had to be included within the chapter notes themselves. We couldn't do them all because it does take up more room. And there was a limit to, this was a children's book, and there was a limit to how many pages we could have. So, and I knew I wanted to include activities. And so that part was not changed by mentor text. I knew that I wanted to include lots of hands-on activities so that kids could live like Laura, live like Almanzo. And I didn't want them to just be like, I didn't want the audience to only be for girls. I can say that. And I didn't want it to be just kind of sitting and doing things. Like I didn't include anything about sewing. I wanted it to be kind of real things. And I included 75 activities of things that kids today could do to really kind of feel a little bit more like Laura and Almanzo as pioneers. I ended each chapter with a discussion area, whether this would be a way to think more deeply about it when you're reading to yourself as a child, or whether a parent is reading with the family, a teacher is reading with a class. These are just things to think more deeply. And that I also had in mind ahead of time. But I also wanted to include historical photos, and I had to pay for those. Not all of them, but many of them I had to pay for, at least of the ones of the Ingalls and Wilder families. And it was worth it to me because what did Laura, what did Mary, what did Carrie, what did they really look like? And young readers wanted to know that kind of thing. So by reading a ton and seeing what was working in other books being recently published today really helped me to make a better book. But I'm not the only one who uses mentor texts. Christy Purifoy wrote the book Placemaker, Cultivating Places of Comfort, Beauty, and Peace. And this is you can kind of tell just by the cover that this is a beautiful book. And it really, that subtitle there of Placemaker, it really speaks strongly. This was published by Zondervan. I think it was published early last year, but it could have been the previous year, I'm not sure. But Christy was telling me how she didn't begin reading the book H is for Hawk by Helen Mcdonald. She didn't begin reading that with any interest in birds or falconry. But this memoir, H is for Hawk, helped her to understand that memoir is much more than personal storytelling. We all have a story to tell, but we don't all have a memoir to tell because we have to make it kind of, if we want to write a memoir, it has to go beyond just us. And so Helen Mcdonald really wove some great things through her story. And she made it a compelling book. And this is what Christy said. She said, I was struggling to understand how my own ordinary personal story could ever become a compelling book for a reader. Helen Mcdonald's personal story of grieving her father is very ordinary, but she made it special by weaving it together with the story of her hawk and the history of falconry. Her book prompted me to ask myself, what passion could I share with a reader? And I realized the answer was a passion for trees. That's why I wove my story of placemaking with the stories of various trees. And Christy did this beautifully. Highly recommend Placemaker. And here's another book. This is a middle grade book by Anna Staniszewski. My Very Unfairy Tale Life is the book that she wrote. And she used two mentor texts for this. The first was Whales on Stilts. And she used this to really get into the right mindset for like absurd comedy, just ridiculous, and make those readers laugh. But this is also a mystery. And so she broke down a David A. Kelly ballpark mystery book. It's a big series that's popular with kids. She broke down a book chapter by chapter to map out just when to plant clues and red herrings. So, she knew what she wanted, and she used mentor text to get a great book, My Very Unfairy Tale Life. Something to think about. Now, some of you remember when Rachel Smoyer was with us on a regular basis. Well, this year she has Take It to Heart coming out, 30 Days Through Revelation, a devotional workbook for women. And this is now available for pre-order. And she used 3 books. And I'm going to, there we go. And she used 3 mentor texts. And this is it's a devotional workbook. And she took a look at My Utmost for Its Highest, Our Daily Bread, and Streams in the Desert. And she said, I knew from reading these that I liked the rhythm of devotionals, a passage, a title, an illustrative story, one simple application point, and a prayer. Now, she said, she also went on to say, and a consistent word count, which doesn't happen in Streams in the Desert, but that was one thing that she did like. But I also knew as a reader that I wished there was more explanation. So when I wrote Take It to Heart, I did include more biblical explanations than you would get in these traditional devotionals. And that makes sense because it was 30 days through Revelation, something that most of us wonder about, and we need explanations when we read and study revelation. So I'm very excited for that. Now, in my own writing, you can see here are some magazine things that I've written with kids in mind. These were published with Cobblestone and Highlights. But it's not just books that we can use mentor texts for. It can be blog posts, poetry, it can be educational writing, which is something I've done, magazines. And when you're talking magazines, it can be articles, it can be fiction, it can be activities, recipes, fillers. I have a friend who she's written a lot of stories and articles for Highlights and some other children's magazines. And she had written a story, and Highlights for children was closed to submissions, but she didn't submit it elsewhere because she knew they would open back up again. And just recently, she saw that they were open back up. She submitted, and she got a response right away saying they wanted it. She knew it was a story for them because she knew the magazine so well. So this is my book, Who Knew? The Truth About Owls. And I can't see in the comments right now, but you might be interested in taking a guess as to how many drafts it took for me to go from idea to published book. And I shouldn't say that, to, let's say, idea to submitted book. So you can take a guess in the chat. How many drafts? It wasn't 5, 10, 15, 20. No, all of those were not working. But I figured out the problem. It was too dry. And this is also with critique partners. I knew it was too dry. It was too long. It was too detailed. And I was writing for too old of an audience for what I wanted to convey. And the too long and too old, they were kind of clumped together because I was writing longer and detailed because I wanted to write for that older middle grade audience. The too dry, that was just me. I was a teacher. I needed to write more with a non-teachery voice. So I identified the problems and I kept on going. I made some changes, some serious changes. And after I'm not certain about how many, but after just a few more drafts, after I really took a good look at this, I had met with an editor at a conference, and it was not a completed manuscript. And this is a picture book. And if you know anything about picture book submissions, you have to actually you're supposed to have a completed manuscript before you submit. I was just getting a critique. I was not planning to submit. But based on those major changes, and before those first 20 drafts, I had shared it with critique partners and at another conference. I never would have, I knew it was not ready for submissions. I would not have considered it. But this editor loved the new version, and the things that he pointed out were all those things that I changed. So I had an invitation to submit, but it wasn't done yet. So I had to keep on going. Not 30 either. It was 35 by the time I was really satisfied and ready to say, yes, this is good. But one of the amazing things is yes, it was ready to submit. And yes, that was a lot of revisions even after the major revisions, but they really only had little tweaks, no major revisions from the editorial team. So that's a whole lot of writing, even for something that's less than 2,000 words. So when it came to Who Knew? The Truth About Owls, what did I change? Well, I changed the target age of the audience. I completely changed the structure. I added humor, a good amount of humor for the sidebars. The sidebars is where I added the humor, but those weren't in it before. And all those details, owls are amazing creatures, but all those details that I wanted to include, I couldn't include them in the main part. I had to include them in the back matter of the story, and that worked. So this is just a quick look. Who's there? The unforgettable call, the glowing eyes, the fierce beak. You recognize an owl when you hear or see one, but do you really know these birds? And then each page spread has a side. Each page spread asks a question and kind of answers it. And then there's a sidebar. Who knew? Did you think owls just hoop? Nah. We make lots of sounds. Listen for screeches, whistles, trills, and even barks. You can know our species by our sounds. I don't want you to see me, but you may hear me near a forest. Other owls live in deserts, rainforests, and the tundra. We're all over the world, even in cities. And then take a look. What's for dinner? That is not a tongue. Yeah, I love your expression, Jean. So, and here's, this who knew caption. Don't hate me just because I eat other owls. Sometimes dinner must be whatever or whoever I can find. I gobble up plenty of rodents you call pests. And you can see that the images that Raycraft add so much. That's because even though this is an expository writing style, it's still a picture book. So the pictures have to add a ton of information. So what good are feathers? And then here's the back matter. And this is where I added some extra details, including like how to help owls and the anatomy of an owl, and then a owl pellet dissection of what's for dinner in the glossary. So if you want to use mentor texts, and I think you might, what can you do? Study the hook. And with this, I would even say, think about like, if you are taking a look at a picture book, you need to hook the reader in the first line. You've got one sentence. If you are writing for kids, you have a couple of paragraphs. If it's a longer middle grade or YA book, nonfiction or fiction, you have a couple of paragraphs. If you're writing for adults, you might have a chapter, but you have to be careful because you need to hook them and you need to hook that reader early. So you might consider studying the character, how characters are introduced, or if you're not writing a novel or a biography, you might consider checking how the topics are introduced. One thing that I look forward to, I have a thought, an idea for a book about two people who lived basically at the same time, but they never met, but they are two famous people. And there are picture books about two individuals and how they interacted, because you don't want one of those characters to dominate the other in the text. And so Vivian Kirkfield wrote a book called, what's it called? It's about Marilyn Monroe, and oh no, my mind is going blank. But it's about two women, and one is a white woman, one is a black woman. All their voices heard. I'm not sure. I've written it down, but she made sure that the white character in this biography did not kind of rescue the black character. It's just something to be aware of. Something else that you might study, how the transitions happen, whether it's the cliffhanger at the end of a chapter, or, we can't end every chapter with a cliffhanger, but how do those transitions happen? How do they happen within a chapter, within a page, in a picture book? What happens with each page turn? Things to think about. You can think about what happens, if you open up a picture book and you say, okay, what's happening on this page? Or a longer book, what's happening in this chapter? And then you can go through each and every page spread, each and every chapter if it's longer. But what makes this entire book engaging? What works? Why do I like this? But the biggest takeaway is, what did the writer do that I can try in my own writing for this project? The big question, what can you do? So this is my next book. We don't have an exact date, but we think Woof, The Truth About Dogs will come out in June. We think, we're not certain. Now, this is part of the Truth About series. And this is book number 2. And this was a lot easier to write because I had the mentor text, the structure, the layout, the voice in Who Knew the Truth About Owls. And number 3, that's Edna. Actually, no, that is not Edna. That was a live spider. And if you want me to show you Edna, who is not a live spider but does have 8 legs, I can show you Edna when we stop screen sharing. So the third book in the Truth About series is about spiders. Okay, And Spiders was even easier to write because I'd already written 2 books. I knew the structure, I knew the voice, and it was so much fun because spiders, whether you love them or hate them, let me tell you, they are fascinating. And I hope that you will give spiders a chance. So if that's Kiwi, she was a kitten, then she's a cat now. But if you are interested in children's mentor text examples, I would suggest you visit Kirsten W. Larson, Kirsten-W-Larson.com. Visit Kirsten's website, and Marcy Atkins, and I don't have hers listed here, but Marcy Atkins has, I'm not sure if she has a blog post or a couple of them that are also great. Great for children's writing mentor text. Sorry, I don't have anything for those of you who do adults. And I am working on a full-length mentor text workshop through Kidlit Creatives right now. And if you don't have to write down the website, you can if you want, but that website will be is at my site, AnnetteWhipple.com. But if you want a discount, Write15 is a discount code that you can use for any of our classes, including the full length it will be focusing on Kidlit, but mentor text, and it will be a full length course, not a quickie run through like today is. But if you do visit my website, AnnetteWhipple.com, as Jean pointed out earlier, I really try to provide lots of good resources for writers, lots of tips to help us be better at what we do. I've had so much help over the years, so I just love to help others and teach, and I like to teach, whether it's through a blog post, through my informational writing, or through a class like this. Just it's fun for me. So Write15 is the discount code, and you can always email me too if you forget. Some things to think about. So I will say that even though it's Kidlit Creatives, I have a Beyond Book Signing workshop there that is for any genre, any audience. It's not just children's literature. And as Jean pointed out, I do think facts are fun. I write informational and nonfiction books. So I have some courses there, including an introductory facts are fun course, as well as a full length 2-hour course that has tons and tons and tons of hands-on activities to really help you do what you need to do to improve yourself, and then getting published with the educational market as well. So if we can connect online, and there's some things there, but I'm hoping that some of you might share how you have used mentor text, as well as any questions that you have. And I'm going to stop sharing, I think. Okay.
Okay. Fascinating. Now, my question, and then we'll have a few minutes. We can invite people. We'll see if Brandy and Melissa have a question first too before we invite people back. Is that so? What comes first, your idea, or like I want to write a book, something like because I enjoy reading this, or which comes first, the chicken or the egg?
I think it depends. For the Luring Goes Wilder companion, the mentor text definitely came first because it inspired me to look for, I could write a book like this. What could I write about? And it didn't take, it took me all of a couple of minutes to really narrow it down. Once I realized, wow. So usually I think the idea comes first, but it doesn't have to. But if you think about how the mentor text can be a completely different genre, with that, the very unfairy tale life. She was studying 2 different books. One was written for kids a little bit younger than her audience, but that was for the mystery and the pacing of the mystery. When she examined the book chapter by chapter, and then she was looking at another one for the humor. And here's the thing: if you need to add some humor to your text, whether it's nonfiction, whether it's fiction, it can be a totally different topic. Like Christy Purefoy had no no interest in birds. And she actually told me she didn't really like birds, but she loved the H is for Hawk book. And so it became an inspiration and that mentor text to make her book. And she was, and that was her second book. And I never asked her if she actually wrote that one first, but I believe she wrote her other book, which I think is called Roots in Sky. I believe she wrote that one first. It was definitely published first. So, idea first or mentor text first really probably just depends on you and the situation.
It almost sounds like when we read a book that just gets us, we ought to stop and look at that. That Yvonne was asking which one. It was like Barbara Brown Taylor gets me every single time. Any of her books.
Yes.
And so that's when I realized she's my mentor. I would love to write a book like hers, but then I had to come up with my own idea type of thing, but I use her for the writing craft even, so
yes,
on that. But if you've got an author that just gets you every time, you ought to sit there and be intentional about it. Why? Ask why. And what could I do? What inspires me? And your Christie's experience. I have her books too. So I never thought about what inspired her. I've never thought about on some of the other books what inspired them. That's a different way of thinking about it.
And when I was preparing for this, I recalled when I was preparing this, to share with Writers Chat, I went back and I remembered a conversation that Christy and I had, and how she told me how much another book inspired her. And she didn't use the term mentor text. She didn't use it in that conversation. And when I was asking her and telling her I was going to be presenting, I said, I'm doing a class on mentor text. I'm pretty sure that you used another book, and because sometimes memory is a little faulty, and she was thrilled to share H is for Hawk because it really mattered that much to her. Oh, I see Elaine has a question. Yeah. Can you give us an idea on your OWL book on how many sidebars, how many pages, etc.? What's the ratio? That's a good question. So typically in a picture book, you plan for 32 pages. However, this right here is one of those pages. Yeah. And then that's me holding Quincy. So even that back matter. So I like back matter. I think it's important. Parents and teachers love it. Curious kids really like it. So when I write nonfiction, I try to include back matter. And actually the books that I was hired, the educational books that I was hired to write, it was the publisher's idea. They made sure that I included back matter too. They would often say, you need to include an activity, you need to include a recipe. But when it's mine, I get to choose. And so I had a whole spread on helping owls. And then I had a spread on the anatomy of owls. I had the page that's the owl pellet dissection, followed by the glossary, and then more resources so kids can learn more. And then they chose to make my biography huge because of I'm sure it was because of the hands-on picture of me holding Quincy, the Eurasian eagle owl. So for a picture book, you have 32 pages to work with. And yes, some picture books are longer, some can be shorter, but typically 32 pages. And so I had four spreads of back matter. That's a lot. Usually it's only two, maybe three, but I chose to do that because it was so much more information. I actually, when I submitted the manuscript, after the main text, I said optional back matter. I had more back matter options than that was included because I wanted the editorial staff to be able to say, this is what's going to work best. And I knew some of them would be included. And I had no idea that they were going to do my little author biography in anything more than just like the jacket flap though. So that was pretty neat. So I believe I had 13. No, typically you have up to 14, I'm showing 4. Typically you have up to 14 page spreads. And Elaine, there are picture book dummies that you can do. And on my website, I have a, like for writers, I have like resources. And if you go to that resource blog post, I have like this document that's several pages long with different resources. Within that resource, I have something that talks about picture book dummies so that you can lay out and paginate what a picture book would look like. But I believe I would have to count, but I think I had 11 page spreads of question and answer followed by the back matter. I could be mistaken though.
Yeah.
So, and yeah,
Fascinating.
so.
Fascinating. Fascinating. We're getting a peek into children's writing here
Yes,
at the Tubies.
I can't help but
Two for the
to
price
talk about
guys.
that.
Brandy, Melissa, do you have anything to either ask or share about mentor text before we invite everybody back on?
I just commented earlier that I'm one of those who actually wasn't familiar with the term, but I had used it, all of my writing career. So yeah, there's so many books that I've used as mentor text. And then it was that exact thing that whatever just stood out to you, that wow factor that was in the book that's like, I must write like that. I must do something like that because that engaged me. And so I thought that's going to engage the reader. So yeah, I agree.
Perfect, Melissa. Yes, absolutely. And there are a handful of writers in the world where they'll say, oh, but I don't read it, but I wrote this. And it turns out to be fabulous. And somehow they are reading something, they're doing something right. But really, I think, readers make the best writers for a reason. And what you said, Melissa, that's it right there. So, yeah.
Brandy, do you have something you want to add or share?
Yeah, you touched on this earlier about how that other writer held that story specifically for highlights because she knew it fit the magazine. And it got me thinking about how as writers, we're told to study the markets. And that's essentially, studying mentor text is essentially what we're doing when we're studying a market that we want to write to. As a short story writer, I do that all the time. I find out the publication that I want to write for, and I read the stories that they publish because I want to know if what they publish is in line with the kinds of stories that I write or want to write. And I know which places are more apt to like this story and that story and maybe not another one. So I think we do a lot more studying of mentor text than we realize, particularly when we're marketing, looking for places that we want to publish. And if people are out there writing and they're not studying the markets, start studying the markets and looking at what the markets are publishing, particularly if you're writing for magazines and periodicals.
Yes, I know. When I was first taking some courses on writing and submitting to magazines, I had submitted a couple of things that I know I did not study. Like I knew that the magazine published those things, but like, oh, that recipe example that I gave earlier, yeah, that was a lesson learned here, personally, because we really have to study and we have to understand what they want, and they don't want to have to make editorial changes of structure. Well, you can do that yourself before you submit. Let them know that you cared enough to study that magazine. Yeah, you're so right, Brandy.
It's excellent correlation there, Brandy. I love that. And the thing I did this year, Annette, is when I became aware about probably a year or so ago of the concept of mentor text. And I started with the idea, well, who does inspire me? Who do I want to write like? That thing that gets to your heart. And it was hard to narrow it down, but there were certain authors, and Barbara Brown Taylor, who I've already mentioned, is one of them. Parker Palmer's another one. Henry Nouwen's a third one. And my other one, I don't have my other one here handy. Kathleen Norris is the other one. So I made myself only say to 3 or 4, and I actually pulled books out of theirs and keep them on a separate shelf or in a separate box so they're handy to pull out when I'm looking for inspiration. And it just you made me think again about the book I'm working on right now is structured similar to one of other Barbara Brown Taylor's books. I think I don't have that one pulled out, and I got to pull that one out and reread that. I think that's what I'm going to kind of do a little bit this week, because I think that would refresh it, make me, inspire me. I don't know. You don't want to mimic them exactly, but yet we can learn from them. They're new ideas.
Right. And
But,
something
I
to think
love
about.
questions. Mhm.
Something to think about is if you are submitting to an editor or an agent, and not self-publishing, you need to be able to say where, you don't need to say what books inspired you, but you can kind of say, my book was a mashup of this and that, however you want to word it in your proposal or in your cover letter or in your query. And that person, showing that personality of knowing, and, if you think about that My Very Unfairy Tale Life, what two very strange mentor texts, if you think of it like that, but it would be, the humor from this and the mystery from that. It's
Mhm.
amazing how we can learn, but we really can. We
Yeah.
really can.
Yeah.
And we learn from others, and we learn, craft books are important. They really are. Workshops like this are really important, but reading the craft
Mhm.
is also, studying that craft is also vital
Vital.
for our writing.
Yeah. And you gave us some great questions about like, how do they do transitions, either from chapter to chapter, or sometimes
Right.
concepts from paragraph to paragraph. I know that's a weakness of mine. I will say that is something I probably don't transition enough. And I really like writing, especially in nonfiction. And I think this is probably somewhat true with fiction. Just on every page, there's something will somebody highlight something? Is this the sentence, the key thing? And I know I don't do that enough, but I know these writers do. Elaine's mentioned Cato. The clarity, the images that he uses are phenomenal, just phenomenal. And to write, model more like that, even have some examples like that on chapters, that would be powerful. Elaine, I agree with you completely on that. So Elaine, I think, yeah, there you shared your email, so thank you for that. Why don't we invite, it's almost noon and we started a little bit late, but why don't we invite everybody back on that want to come back on, and we'll probably take a minute or two if somebody has an additional question or something to share before we quit the recording. And then, of course, we'll have our little after party afterwards on that. And if you can't come on back, put something in the chat that you can't come on back, and we'll release you, as we call from Writers Chat jail. You can't get your back. Sometimes if we've taken you off, sometimes we have to invite you, come on back in. So just put it in the chat if you can't come on back in on that. I'll take care of that. Does any of you have questions that you want to ask, or something you want to share?
Just thank you so much. This was really interesting. I learned a lot.
Thank you, Jan. Yay, that's my goal. It always is, that. Mentor texts have just been so important to me, and it's, many of us don't even know that we're using them, but they're still important. And when we know how we can use a mentor text even better, it matters.
It
Yeah.
really makes
Thanks,
a
Jan.
big difference. While they were still having the recording going, I do want to mention next week's too, so to promote that. And we're going to have two of our own again. It's going to be Jan and Rhonda, and they're going to talk about branding and how we use colors, kind of the meaning of colors to create. I don't know, you're both here. Do you want to add anything to next week's, what we're going to talk about next week, Jan and Rhonda? Did I hit it?
It's going to be fun. I found even more stuff on color from what I talked about before. So
we're tag teaming, and I'm really excited because I've been playing with some of my favorite online tools, and to teach us how to generate color schemes and how to apply them to different aspects of the materials that we produce. And so I think it'll be a lot of fun. I think it'll be informative, and I'm looking forward to teaching with Jam.
Good. And I look forward to the topic. One other thing is, as we wrap up the recording today, I want to say, I don't know if you've picked it up, writers. Something else Annette's done that I just thought was superior was how she had pictures taken of herself with those animals. That spider thing drove me crazy. But the owl, and I'm assuming there'll be a dog picture, I don't remember if we saw
That's
one.
not as exciting.
Yeah, but what a cool thing, because I have seen those pictures on your Instagram and your social media, because I follow her over there. And so she's using that. And so it's generated. I didn't know the spider book wasn't out yet, but I knew the spider book was coming, so look how that's worked on that. So it is so key to do something. It's going to make me inspired. I'm going to have to go find a picture of the book I'm working on now and start incorporating that. But what a neat marketing idea. She's done an absolutely excellent idea with that. So congratulations on all your
Thank you. Well, and even with the Laura Ingalls Wilder Companion, when I was on site at Laura Ingalls Wilder home site, they put me in a bonnet and took a picture with it wasn't Laura's childhood home, but it was Almanza Wilder's childhood home in the background. And they had me take off my glasses too, which surprised me, but it's like, that makes sense. But that ended up being the author photo for this. And I haven't had an author, a real author photo taken in a long time, because for the owl book, I was holding Quincy. And for the dog book, I have Baxter beside me. For the spider book, I had a spider. When I held a tarantula for the first time. So it's interesting. And I brought the person. So inside here is a spider skin. It's not. You can look away if you need to. But this is. I call her Edna. And this is not a real spider, but it's the exoskeleton of a spider. And I can use that at author visits and things like that too. So it's just something else to draw interest in, especially when I'm on screen with students, because, with virtual author visits, it's really important to have lots of things to show. So
we all need an image to accompany whatever we're working on. So you Scottish Ireland history. You got to have something with like those castles, Rhonda. Isn't it Rhonda that does the castle time? It's castles, Okay, well, let's wrap up the recording. Annette, thank you. You have really given us a lot to think about. And, we say we come, sometimes we drag ourselves here on Tuesday mornings or late afternoon if you're in France, right, Isabel? And you drag yourself or whatever your time is, and you think, and we go away refreshed and renewed as writers. You guys are a great community and having great speakers like Annette. We're so glad you came back with us. Please come back. We'll have you back.
I know.
She's a teacher at heart, isn't she? So thank you, everybody. Join us next week for Bending in Colors. Bring your rainbows with us, because I think that'll be an interesting discussion too. So we'll see you all next week on Writers Chat. Bye now.